So about 3 months ago, I opened the door to my home, and this is what I heard. Now, I got to tell you, I was a little bit surprised because the only person in my house who plays piano is my daughter, Tess, and she's been basically playing the same dozen songs for the last 4 years. Do you know Ode to Joy? Anyone know that song? Right, so yeah. So I thought maybe we had a house guest or something, but sure enough, as I turned the corner, I saw that it was Tess playing the piano, and I just sat there for a second and listened to her, and then I looked at her and I said, "Tess, you're learning Journey. How cool is that?" And she turned to me and she kind of smiled, and then she looked to the end of the piano where I noticed that she had taken my computer, my laptop, and loaded up a YouTube video by someone who I had no idea who he was, but who was teaching her how to play Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, and that she had actually also downloaded the sheet music illegally. We had a little conversation about copyright later that night. But it was great. All in all, I was pretty happy. Here was my child taking the initiative to learn something that she wanted to learn without anybody telling her to do that. And for the next couple of days, she was practicing and practicing. And sure enough, her piano teacher came later in the week. And when she came in, I said, "Jen, guess what? You're not going to believe this. Tess is learning Journey." And Jen looked at me. She goes, "She's what?" I said, "She's learning Journey. She's learning Don't Stop Believin'. And she sounds great. She's been practicing. I'm so proud of her." And she goes, "Well, she can't do that. She's not ready to play Journey." And I got to tell you, I think this is just the coolest moment to be a learner right now, isn't it? It's very different from the moment that most of us had when we were growing up. We didn't share this moment, but in this moment, our kids can learn pretty much whatever they want, whenever they want. And it is a big shift that I think as educators we have to begin to understand. One of my favorite authors, John Seeley Brown, captures this, I think, pretty well in his new book called A New Culture of Learning, where he says, basically, if we have access, and I know there are lots of kids out there who don't have access right now, lots of families, and I think we have to get those kids connected at this moment. It's almost a moral imperative to do that. But if they have access, our kids now have an easy connection between their passions to learn and the people and the resources to learn it. And I think that's pretty amazing, to be honest with you. Mark and my daughter Tess are not waiting for a curriculum to deliver to them the things that they want to learn. They're simply going out and learning those things when they want to. And I got to tell you, I just think that's really, really cool right now, and something that even 10 years ago I don't think we could have imagined to the scale and to the scope that we have right now. Or let's just wait for Superman to just kind of sweep in, as they did across the river, with Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook coming in and giving Newark $100 million to make schools better in Newark. And you know that that investment is going to be measured by how well those kids score on the test. At the end of the day, that is how we're going to judge it. Now, I've seen this better thing up close. Last fall, I was in a high school in Texas where English teachers told me that they are reading from the same PowerPoints on the same day in order that their kids get the same content so they can take the test and pass it. And by the way, they're doing a great job. They're an exemplary school in Texas for doing that right now. And by the way, let's not miss the point. In this article, it's all about raising the needle on the test scores. That's why we are doing this. So let's not make any mistake about what better means. It means this. Now I got to tell you, as a parent of 2 kids and as someone who's been learning in these spaces for almost a decade now, if this is your definition of better, you can have it. I don't want this for my kids. I don't want this for any kids, to be honest with you, because this means that basically schools are test prep. And if you want test prep, that's fine, but realize that if you want test prep, you don't need schools any longer for test prep. Because you can sit your kids down in front of a computer right now with an internet connection and send them to MIT OpenCourseWare or to Newton or to Khan Academy, and they will get personalized, self-paced curriculum where they can pretty much get prepared for the test. Right? And I got to tell you, if we look at this world as it is, we know in our heart of hearts this is not the same as it ever was. This is really different. And we have to think about what that means in terms of preparing kids in a much, much different way. Here is the hard truth that we have to accept. Schools, in the form that they were constructed, are no longer relevant to our kids' lives in terms of places to get information and knowledge. Information and knowledge are everywhere. And what that means is we have to begin to re-envision schools for a different purpose right now. And I think that purpose is actually more meaningful, more important, and more difficult in a lot of ways, because schools for our kids right now have to be places of deep inquiry where they are solving real world problems, because they have a lot of problems that they're going to need to solve. where classrooms and teachers are learning basically how to collaborate with global peers to create beautiful, important work that they can share with the world, that can teach others, where we can help them find their passions and support those passions so they can become the lifelong learners in these contexts that we all want them to be. And I have to tell you, none of that is the stuff of test prep. All of that is the stuff of life prep. And all of that requires great teachers, teachers who are too good to be reading PowerPoints or index cards or having earbuds put in their ears telling them how to teach. We each have a role in this, every one of us. We have to see the world differently right now. We have to see it for the connections and the networks that are possible. And each of us has to be willing, I think, at this moment to re-examine our own learning in these contexts. Because here's the good news, right? Those easy connections that our kids have to the people and the resources that they need to learn about whatever it is they're passionate to learn, we have those too. Those are our connections as well if we want to take advantage of them. And I think that's an amazing opportunity, and I think we have to seize that moment right now. One of my favorite quotes right now is from Eric Hoffer, who says, "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. This system was built for a world that no longer exists." We have to stop talking about better. We have to start talking about different. And for our kids' sake and for our sake, we have to do that now. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Now, I wanted to start with the question, when was the last time you were called childish? For kids like me, being called childish can be a frequent occurrence. Every time we make irrational demands, exhibit irresponsible behavior, or display any other signs of being normal American citizens, we are called childish. Which really bothers me. After all, take a look at these events. Imperialism and colonization, world wars, George W. Bush. Ask yourself, who's responsible? Adults. Now, what have kids done? Well, Anne Frank touched millions with her powerful account of the Holocaust. Ruby Bridges helped to end segregation in the United States. And most recently, Charlie Simpson helped to raise 120,000 pounds for Haiti on his little bike. So as you can see evidenced by such examples, age has absolutely nothing to do with it. The traits the word childish addresses are seen so often in adults that we should abolish this age discriminatory word when it comes to criticizing behavior associated with irresponsibility and irrational thinking. Kids already do a lot of learning from adults, and we have a lot to share. I think that adults should start learning from kids. Now, I do most of my speaking in front of an education crowd, teachers and students, and I like this analogy. It shouldn't just be a teacher at the head of the classroom telling students, do this, do that. The students should teach their teachers. Learning between grown-ups and kids should be reciprocal. The reality, unfortunately, is a little different, and it has a lot to do with trust, or a lack of it. Now, if you don't trust someone, you place restrictions on them, right? If I doubt my older sister's ability to pay back the 10% interest I established on her last loan, I'm going to withhold her ability to get more money from me until she pays it back. True story, by the way. Now, adults seem to have a prevalently restrictive attitude towards kids, from every don't do that, don't do this in the school handbook, to restrictions on school internet use. As history points out, regimes become oppressive when they're fearful about keeping control. And although adults may not be quite at the level of totalitarian regimes, kids have no or very little say in making the rules, when really the attitude should be reciprocal, meaning that the adult population should learn and take into account the wishes of the younger population. Now, what's even worse than restriction is that adults often underestimate kids' abilities. We love challenges, but when expectations are low, trust me, we will sing to them. I love to write from the age of 4, and when I was 6, my mom bought me my own laptop equipped with Microsoft Word. Thank you, Bill Gates, and thank you, Mom. I wrote over 300 short stories on that little laptop, and I wanted to get published. Instead of just scoffing at this heresy that a kid wanted to get published or saying, wait until you're older, my parents were really supportive. Many publishers were not quite so encouraging. One large children's publisher ironically saying that they didn't work with children. Might want to, children's publisher, not working with children. I don't know, you're kind of alienating large client there.
Because one of the really important questions is, in the age where you can access knowledge in almost any form on the internet, what is the added value of a teacher? Really? That's a really hard question today. What is your added value? Because if I walk into your classroom and I watch you teach, and then I can show the kids how they can learn the same thing online, you have to ask, what's my added value? And I'm worried that some of you don't know that there are all these resources. So the math one, Khan Academy. So I said, is anybody in the room using Khan Academy? And they were all math teachers. One math teacher raised his hand. I said, how are you using it? And he says, oh, I'm using that with my daughter at home. My daughter. She's Khan, she's going way ahead, and it's really amazing. You're absolutely right. And I said, so you know it works with your daughter. How about in class? He says, no, I'll never use it in class. Do you want to take a guess why he will never use it in class? Take a guess about why he said he would never use it in class. He said, one-to-one, Khan Academy's fine. Because there's no boundary and kids can keep learning. Yeah, right? Some of you are a little too slow on that. And so I said, can you just explain? And he said, yeah, I have to make sure that every student is doing the same set of problems at the same time. That's how I teach math. They all take the same test on the same day. They all do the same homework on the same day. Khan Academy will disrupt all of that. I'll have some kids 6 months ahead. I can't have that. So we have to, and I said, you're in the business to figure out how to stop learning? Is that what you're telling me? And the biggest problem of all is letting go of control. If I could teach teachers one skill that would free up the use of technology, which is unlimited, I am not going to teach you a piece of technology. I'm not going to do that. Because you might not be ready for the freedom that comes with that. So this is really about shifting control. It is not about technology. I have learned this over and over again in the last 30 years of trying to do this. I'm going to say the weirdest things. I don't think a lot of kids know how to learn. I think they know how to be taught. And knowing how to be taught is very different than learning how to learn, especially with today's tools. By the way, that was explained to me by a kid at a school. I said, what's school about? And this 16-year-old said, oh, well, if the teacher doesn't know it, chances are you're not going to learn it all year. We learn what the teacher already knows. And we only learn it in the way the teacher teaches, whatever way that is. And she said, what school is about is sit down, learn how to be taught. And she wasn't saying this in a nice way. I'm saying it in a nicer way. I think the mark of a really good teacher in the digital age is to demonstrate how they learn, not what they already know. Chances are what you already know is available. I can find it. But how you learn, I can't find. That would be an interesting thing to demonstrate on the first day of school. How does a teacher learn?
What schools are encouraged to do is to find out what kids can do across a very narrow spectrum of achievement. One of the effects of No Child Left Behind has been to narrow the focus onto the so-called STEM disciplines. They're very important. I'm not here to argue against science and math. On the contrary, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. A real education has to give equal weight to the arts, the humanities, to physical education. An awful lot of kids... Sorry, thank you. One estimate in America currently is that something like 10% of kids getting on that way are being diagnosed with various conditions under the broad title of attention deficit disorder, ADHD. I'm not saying there's no such thing. I just don't believe it's an epidemic like this. If you sit kids down hour after hour doing low-grade clerical work, don't be surprised if they start to fidget, you know. Children are not, for the most part, suffering from a psychological condition. They're suffering from childhood, you know, and I know this because I spent my early life as a child. I went through the whole thing. And kids prosper best with a broad curriculum that celebrates their various talents, not just a small range of them. And by the way, the arts aren't just important because they improve math scores, they're important because they speak to parts of children's being which are otherwise untouched. The second... Thank you. The second principle that drives human life and flourishing is curiosity. If you can light the spark of curiosity in a child, they will learn without any further assistance very often. Children are natural learners. It's a real achievement to put that particular ability out or to stifle it. Curiosity is the kind of engine of achievement. Now, the reason I say this is because one of the effects of the current culture here, if I can say so, has been to deprofessionalize teachers. There is no system in the world or any school in the country that's better than its teachers. Teachers are the lifeblood of the success of schools. But teaching is a creative profession. Teaching properly conceived is not a delivery system. You know, you're not there just to pass on received information. Great teachers do that. But what great teachers also do is mentor, stimulate, provoke, engage. You see, in the end, education is about learning. If there's no learning going on, there's no education going on. And people can spend an awful lot of time discussing education without ever discussing learning. The whole point of education is to get people to learn. A friend of mine, old friend, actually very old, he's dead. That's as old as it gets, I'm afraid. So, but a wonderful guy, he was. A wonderful philosopher. He used to talk about the difference between the task and achievement senses of verbs. You know, you can be engaged in the activity of something, but not really be achieving it. It's like dieting. It's a very good example, you know. There he is, he's dieting. Is he losing any weight? Not really. Teaching is a word like that. You can say, there's Deborah, she's in room 34, she's teaching. But if nobody's learning anything, she may be engaged in the task of teaching, but not actually fulfilling it. The role of a teacher is to facilitate learning. That's it. And part of the problem is, I think, that the culture of, the dominant culture of education has come to focus on not teaching and learning, but testing. Now, testing is important. Standardized tests have a place. But they should not be the dominant culture of education. They should be diagnostic. They should help. You know, if I go for a medical examination, I want some standardized tests. I do. You know, I want to know what my cholesterol level is compared to everybody else's on a standard scale. I don't want to be told on some scale my doctor invented in the car. You know, your cholesterol is what I call level orange. Really? Is that good? We don't know. But all that should support learning. It shouldn't obstruct it, which of course it often does. So in place of curiosity, what we have is a culture of compliance. Our children and teachers are encouraged to follow kind of routine algorithms rather than to excite that power of imagination and curiosity. And the third principle is this, that human life is inherently creative. It's why we all have different resumes. We create our lives, and we can recreate them as we go through them. It's the common currency of being a human being. There is wonderful work happening in this country. But I have to say, it's happening in spite of the dominant culture of education, not because of it. It's like people are sailing into a headwind all the time. And the reason I think is this, that many of the current policies are based on mechanistic conceptions of education. It's like education is an industrial process that can be improved just by having better data. And somewhere in, I think, the back of the mind of some policymakers is this idea that if we fine-tune it well enough, if we just get it right, it'll all hum along perfectly into the future. It won't, and it never did. We have to recognize that it's a human system, and there are conditions under which people thrive, and conditions under which they don't. We are, after all, organic creatures. And the culture of the school is absolutely essential. Culture is an organic term, isn't it? Not far from where I live is a place called Death Valley. Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in America, and nothing grows there. Nothing grows there because it doesn't rain, hence Death Valley. In the winter of 2004, it rained in Death Valley. 7 inches of rain fell over a very short period. And in the spring of 2005, there was a phenomenon. The whole floor of Death Valley was carpeted in flowers for a while. What it proved is this, that Death Valley isn't dead. It's dormant. Right beneath the surface are these seeds of possibility, waiting for the right conditions to come about.